So one night in October, Susan, I'm in the kitchen reading the Long Island Catholic. I'm reading the activities of the day, which I did on a regular basis. And Susan and Kathy came walking in, and Susan says, "Dad, why don't you go out tonight? Find a place to go. Have a, you know, you know a lot of people. You know a lot of place. Go ahead. Yeah, we'll take care of the kids. You don't have to worry about a thing." Right? Susan was all of 11 at the time. So I said, or 12. So I said, okay. And they went back inside, not knowing that they wanted to watch the beauty contest that was on television that night. And so they were glad to see me go. Well, I didn't decide to go until a few minutes later when I read St. Anne's in Brentwood had a St. Monica's Guild for widows and widowers. I said, yeah, I'll go see. Right? And I did that. So I drove out to Brentwood, it's about 45 minutes away, never been there before, walked into St. Anne's in Brentwood, and of course, what do I walk into but a widow and widowers club with about 125 people. There were about 5 men, and the rest were not men. And I go walking in and go walking down to the basement where they are. And of course, there are young, old, in between, women. And sitting to the left as I'm walking down the steps is this cute little lady, right, conducting the meeting. Turns out that that was Dolores, who was the chair lady of new members. So she was talking to the new members. One night I was at a cocktail party in the basement of one of the other ladies, and there was this beautiful woman who walked by me. It turned out that I didn't know her name at that point, but her name was Dolores. I found out later on that she was the chair lady of new members and also the chair lady of the annual Christmas party for children of the St. Monica's Club. At a meeting, Dolores said, "I'm going to need help at the Christmas party. If anyone can do that, I'd appreciate it. Or here's my phone number, and you could call me." So I called her, and I said, "I can help. I've got 6 kids, though." And she said, "Bring them along. I got 5. It's okay." So we went to the annual Christmas party. Well, that was very interesting. She really wanted somebody who could lift the sodas, put them in the right place, help with the various things on stage, and organize and follow orders. So I did all of those things. And while I was doing it, she organized the stage craft, and so she had a couple of kids doing dances. She asked who could tell a story, and Stephen, my son Stephen, stepped forward and told a couple of jokes. And so it turned out to be a wonderful activity. And Beth, who was a little toddler at the time, toddled across the stage. And Dolores told me subsequently she fell in love with her immediately. Well, having had a good experience, I called Dolores and I said, "Let's go out to dinner." And she said, "I haven't had a date since my husband died." I said, "Well, neither have I. Well, I did have one, but not." I said, so I went and we had a date. But before we had a date, I have to tell you about a little story before we had the Christmas party. It seems like there was a pizza party in late November, and we went to the pizza party. I went to the pizza party and everybody else did, and there was a dance to go along with the pizza party. And the pizza party was in a pizza joint where they had a dance floor and they had a jukebox. which was wonderful. The president of the club asked me to be sure that I was not, that I spread myself thin, because I was the only man who really could dance. The others could do some, but so I danced, and at one point I saw Dolores, and I danced with her. And I was smoking a cigar as I was dancing. Cute stuff, I'll tell you. And we had a nice dance, and at the end of the dance I said to her, well, Pat told me I have to spread myself thin, so it's been a pleasure, right? So I go and dance with somebody else, and I left her in the middle of the floor, and she went on her way. However, shortly thereafter, the party ended. And I went home, and as I go home, I'm scratching my head, and I smell arpège. Arpège was a perfume at the time. Arpège was the perfume that Lois used to use. Arpège was the perfume that Dolores had on. Well, it got me thinking that it was time for me to start looking. So on December 21st, 1967, Dolores and I went on our first date. We went to the Smithtown House, which was a local cabaret, which was very pleasant. They had a piano player right at the front of the eating area. We sat right next to the piano player. I asked him if he could play the song Dolores. Well, Dolores was always a very active, fast kind of song. He played it as a romantic ballad. Absolutely beautiful. We had a meal of Chateaubriand and escargot. Now, she had not been on a date for years, and I was always a little capable of ordering. And she said to me, would you order for us? So I said, Chateaubriand. I said, one end raw, the other end well done, because she liked well done. And I said, and escargot. And she said, oh, escargot, I've never had that. I said, that's wonderful. Well, they delivered the escargot, and she said, oh my God, they're snails. Turns out that she loved them. She ate the snails, and she loved them. From then on, whenever we had a chance to get escargot, she got them without a question. That was our first date. Well, in retrospect, what had happened, after the pizza party, she had gone home, and her mother was there in Smithtown, and her mother said, did you meet any interesting person? And she said, yes, I met Mr. Obnoxious. And she said, what was Mr. Obnoxious like? And she said, well, two things. He smoked a cigar as we were dancing, and then at the end of the dance, he left me in the middle of the floor, and so I got to spread myself thin. Well, that experience carried over. So the night that I had my first date with her, I went to pick her up, and I brought her a little bottle of Kahlua. I thought she would like that, which she did. And her mother said to her before I arrived, who is this Sam that is coming? And she said, oh, remember Mr. Obnoxious? I arrived on the scene to pick her up, and her two youngest kids, Kathleen and Donna, see me sitting on the couch, waiting for her to get ready, and they came running across the living room, jumped on my lap and said, are you going to be our new daddy? And I said, we'll have to see about that. And so that's the way we began. And Grandma DeSanto's words, I never forgot.
Yeah.
We're going to have to see about that. Sitting on the couch with Kathleen and Donna asking, am I going to be their new daddy? And who comes in the room but Arlene, Tom, and Richard? Now, Arlene was the oldest daughter. Richard was the second oldest. Tom, the third oldest. Kathleen and Donna followed thereafter. These 5 kids were 5 kids. I looked at them and I said, 5 kids. They seem nice enough. They're trained well. They speak very well. They have all the quirks of young kids, which was fine. I looked at them and I said, we can have a lot of fun. Especially when Donna and Kathleen, sitting on my lap, well, kind of like hugging me, like I'm this cute guy that they've never seen before, or I was a movie star, or whatever, was such a good feeling. So there I met all 5 of them. I thought they were going to fit in very, very well with my kids. Of course, there were 6. Turned out that their ages almost fit together, almost like that. Only one of each, Stephen and Tom, were of the same year, but all the others were integrated. Dolores and I decided to have a second date on January 6th, 1967. January 6th. The reason we wanted to do that, it was right after the New Year, and we thought we'd have a good time. And so we decided to do that, and I drove to pick her up. She was living in, or she was at that time staying with her mother in Flushing, Queens. And so I drove from Mineola to Flushing, Queens, and it was snowing like it was going out of style. But I parked in front of the house, found it pretty easily, and knocked on the door, and I'm greeted with Dolores and her mother, and Dolores saying, "Oh, Sam, we can't go out. My father had a heart attack." Oh, I said. And with that, the EME people are carrying her father up the stairs. However, they have a twisty stair, and he almost falls out of the stretcher. He almost falls out of the stretcher. They get him placed back in, they carry him up, they put him into bed, they come downstairs and they leave, and Dolores says, "You see, I have to stay home with my father." And her mother and Arlene and Richard all say, "No, you don't, Mom. We'll take care of it. We'll take care of it." And Dolores' mother says, "Oh, no, you go ahead. Have a good time." So Dolores decides that she would go out with me. And so we were originally planning to go into New York City, but that became impossible. So instead, we went to Sunlux in Queens, and we went to this Chinese place, and it was snowing like all get out. It was very cold. At the end of the dinner, we're sitting there, and he brings over the cookies, the almond cookies. What did they call those? Anyhow. The
fortune cookies?
Fortune cookies, right. So bring over the fortune cookies, and she opens hers up, and she begins laughing. And I said, "What are you laughing about?" She says, "You'd never believe it. It says, the marriage will be prosperous." Well, I broke up laughing, and I said, "Well, that's good, because I was going to propose to you tonight." Second date. But here I met this woman who immediately captivated me. I never had, when you get married the first time, you get to meet somebody, you get to know them over a period of time, you start realizing things as you go on, and things start falling into place, the values of what you want with your life. And here I met a woman who had all of those values. She had family values, she had religious values, she had all those important things to me. So she laughed, I laughed. We got out in the car, and it was snowing like it would all get out. that night, there was 12 inches of snow. And I turned around the car and I said, we're going to get married. And she said, oh, can I have a say in that? I said, of course, you can say yes. The next morning I called to inquire of her father. I thought that was a good way to continue the commentary, but at the same time to show some concern. And her mother gets on the phone and she says, oh, Pop, he's doing well. He feels so good. The only thing is Dolores is in the hospital. I said, she's in the hospital? How come? What happened? And she said, well, she went out to go to church. She slipped on the ice and broke her arm. I said, how'd she get to the hospital? She said, well, the fireman took her. I said, well, who's the fireman? She said, my neighbor. He was going to work, so he saw her. He took her to the hospital. I said, who's with her? She said, nobody. She said, nobody could go with her because nobody could get down there. I said, that's okay. I'll go. So I get in my car and I start driving. That morning it's ice cold, so there's black ice on the road. I'm driving along, sliding along, feeling a little wary about that whole thing. Just be careful where you're going and how you're doing it. Slow down, stuff like that. Go to the hospital, park right in front of the hospital, Flushing Hospital. Go walking in, looking around, and there she is sitting in a wheelchair and obviously devastated. Her head is down and she's obviously been crying. And I went over to her and she looked up and she saw me and she said, my knight in shining armor. Well, I laughed at that point. Of course, she was crying and laughing at the same time. And so at that point, I said, what can I do? How can I? She said, I have to go up for an x-ray on the 3rd floor. There's nobody to push me. I said, easy. So I pushed it. I drove her back to her mother's house. She told me subsequently, being her knight in shining armor, that's the thing that made me. Well, I never forgot that either. Over the next few months, we saw each other on a pretty regular basis. Her arm was broken. We went to a movie. We saw The Sound of Music, and it was a very romantic movie, as you probably remember. And while we were there, helping her to sit down in the chair, in the audience, her cast hits me in the head, and I get a bruise on the top of the head. Well, it was on the forehead, so not bad. Right? So while I'm sitting there, and we watch the movie, and we go back home, and I drop her at home, and in Smithtown, and then I come back to Mineola. And the next day, my mother-in-law, with Aunt Catherine, stops over, as she did periodically during the week, almost every week, until the next year. And she said, what happened to your head? I said, a lady I went out with hit me with her cast. She said, oh, were you being bad? I said, no, it was an accident. Sometime later, that same year, my son Tommy became ill. It was on the same day that the Bronx group of friends had come over to my house because it was my time to have them, and I made a roast beef, and I asked Dolores to come, and she did. So it was Dolores and 6 old friends of mine, and she met them, and they all made friends very quickly. But that night, my son Tommy developed an asthmatic condition and was in horrible shape. During or just before we started eating, I went up to spend a little time with him to help him through it. I turned on the hot water in the bathroom, closed all the doors. The hot water was very hot. It was over 200 degrees, so therefore it really warmed up the place. There was a lot of smoke that got into his lungs. We were able to help him through that. And I went back downstairs, and Dolores said, you know, I'm a nurse, so let me go up and take a look. So for the next 3/4 of an hour, she spent with Tommy. All my friends. Never forgot that. How she, on a first visit to the house, took all that time to spend with my son, who was so sick. About February or March of 1968. And so Dolores and I kept going out together. We finally got to a point where, after asking her, you know, or telling her for 4 or 5 months that I was going to marry her, she finally acceded that yes, that would be okay. Marriage. The night before the wedding, however, at 10:30 or thereabouts, I get a call from Dolores. It seems like Dolores had second thoughts, and she told me she was not going to show up the next day. She could not marry me. It was just too much. 11 kids? Impossible. I told her, that's okay. Lois told me the same thing, and I'll tell you the same thing. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll talk about it in church. Right? Well, Lois showed up, and Dolores showed up the next day. Dolores was a beautiful bride, walking on it. Even though she was a second marriage for her, she was dressed beautifully, and it was not over the top. It was just so beautiful. And we got married, and while we got married, and Father Joe was doing the ceremony, he used St. Paul's words that, and the bride shall be fruitful as an olive tree. And he said, I think that's already been done. He said, and you know, St. Paul is known as the wife hater, but he really wasn't the wife hater. However, you don't have to worry about that. While we were on our honeymoon, there were many things we talked about, and I think that they are so important that we have to just talk about them. It is retrospectively the setting for which we began our whole life together. So for the next 48 years, we lived trying to follow that kind of guideline. To begin with, every morning we had coffee together. And so we had coffee together while on our honeymoon every morning. And we had coffee in our room, which was important, because that set the tone for when we got home, where we made our coffee in our room for every morning. We locked our door, and it was just us. When we woke up, we drank at least 2 cups of coffee each and talked about the day and about the activities and about anything that needed to be discussed. Well, while we were on the beach in the Bahamas, after having started off the day with our coffee and talking about other things, we began to talk about our kids, what we do with our kids and what we do with our families. And so the first thing and the easiest thing for us to do was to talk about how we would inculcate all the families, not leave anybody out. So Lois's family was included, all of them, like they always had been when Lois was there. And George's family was included, like they always had been before George passed away. That was very important to us because we saw that all our kids needed that. And as far as we were concerned, it would be another fulfillment of something. During that time, we talked about our kids and about the fact that they were our kids. We were not his and hers, and yet whatever, as the movie had. The movie talked about yours, mine, and ours. No, they were our kids. And even though they were not born from my cycle or from her cycle, they were still our kids. And so that's the way we were going to approach them. And when we got home, we told them all that they would all call me Pop, and they would call her Mom. It would not be anything else, and that's the way it was going to be. And they would all be our kids. There were no step kids in this family, no step children, and no step parents. We were all kids, whatever. That was one of the things we talked about on the beach. We also talked about how we would set up the rooms, how we would have the kids living in the various rooms. I had, prior to our marriage, constructed 4 bedrooms in the attic. And I had 5 bedrooms on the second floor. So we set it up how the 11 kids would be together. And that worked out pretty well, although there were some complaints about this one or that one. It was really not gigantic in scope, and we were able to adjust that later on. But the important thing was that we recognized together that both of us wanted to have 11 children. They were our children. I looked at it from the standpoint of a father. I had to take care of the kids. When necessary, I would discipline them, but I'd try and keep the discipline down so that, they'd understand at that same time it wouldn't be very horrible. So that worked out very well. When we told the kids this, they all accepted it. In this room, in the living room, we brought all the kids together, so we had the 11 kids when we got back from our honeymoon, and we told them all this. We said it in different pieces, and so it worked out very well from that standpoint. While we were on the beach, we also talked about Lois and George. Lois, I told her about, and I told them where she went to high school, and Dolores told me where she went to high school. It turned out that the two of them were in high school together at the same time. Lois was a freshman when Dolores was a senior, and they both went to St. Thomas Aquinas High School. Dolores told me about George. George was a very nice man, very sweet and quiet. Compared to me, he was really very quiet. So there we were on the beach, and she was telling me about George. And the thing about George was that he was very gentle, comparatively. The kids all loved him. Dolores loved him. They were bosom buddies. During his entire period of illness, he never made it harder on them than had to be because of the circumstances. Never was a moaner or a groaner. Didn't embarrass the children or anybody else. Was always with them in the parties and whatever. Tried to make it very nice, even to the time of death. Dolores told me that at the time of death he was in the hospital, and she went to see him, and he left very pleasantly. I found that very interesting. The kids, of course, all loved him. The 2 youngest did not remember him as well. The other 3 did, and talked about him, which was nice. We got over that transition, thank God, because now Lois was a real person to Dolores, and George was a real person to me. So we bought a house up in Courtright, New York. That's halfway up from here to Canada. At least that's what it looked like for us. It was a 5.5 hour trip from home. And we went up there and we had the darndest good time. We bought a place up in Courtright. We went up there for vacations and for Thanksgivings. It was just wonderful. Our Thanksgivings there were probably the best that we could ever remember. One year while we were there, second year or first year that we were there, the boys went across the road to Cole's shop, Cole's motor shop. He did automotive work as well as automotive work, but he also kept dogs that might have been abandoned on the road going past. And one dog was named, well, he didn't have a name at that time, but this dog had a broken hip because he had been thrown out of a car by somebody and had found his way over to Coles. And so Richard, Tom, Stephen, when they were over there, Matthew, they saw this dog and he followed them across the road to our house. They decided to name him Jackson. And so Jackson became a part of our family, but not before Thanksgiving was over. Because on Thanksgiving Day, he had been outside and it was cold, and the boys asked if we could let him into the kitchen. And so we said, sure. So he came into the kitchen and he lay down next to the kerosene stove and he was warm there and he obviously enjoyed it there. And we gave him some food to eat, which was good. But our rule was he stays in the kitchen, not in the living room. So there we were, sitting in the living room, dining room of our Courtright house. Courtright was near Oneonta. And we were sitting there watching The Waltons, which was a family show. And we were sitting around this little tiny television. And because the antenna was not too good, we all held hands, and the last person held on to the wire that was connected to the television. So we had a picture that we could watch, and we were enjoying it no end. At the same time, Jackson was in the kitchen, and all the kids wanted Jackson to come home with us, but Dolores was absolutely not. Well, as we're sitting there watching The Waltons, Jackson took it upon himself to walk over to Dolores and put his head on her lap. He just did that. She put her hand on his head, and all of a sudden she fell in love with this little dog that she had been afraid of, like she had always been afraid of dogs. This dog was now a member of our family. That just melted her heart, and mine too. So we took Jackson home with us, and from then on, he was part of the family. He lasted 15 years. We were sorry to see him go, but his memory stayed with us forever. We had a household that was wide open for everybody. We had kids here all the time, and Dolores and I talked about that because some families didn't do that. But the one thing we always felt was that if we had the kids here, we could watch them, supervise them, help them work their way through whatever needed to be done, and not have to worry about are they doing anything horrible or bad or whatever. We had parties. We had more parties than you could shake a stick at. We had parties. If it were Tuesday, we had a party. We had birthday parties for every kid, and for Grandma, and for me, and Dolores. The reason for Grandma is she lived on the other side of town, so we couldn't ignore her. So we had at least 15 parties, birthday parties, every year. We had graduation parties for every kid. Elementary school, junior high school, high school. When they went to college, we sometimes had a party combined with a high school, but we didn't have too many college parties. But we did have wedding parties. We had engagement parties. We had rehearsal parties. We had parties during the summer because it was summer. We had a 4th of July party. We had a Labor Day party. More parties than you could shake a stick at. Mark arrived on the scene. Mark was born in the spring of 1969, and he was, right from the start, a beauty. Everybody loved him. Of course, the boys liked the idea that they had another kid to tease. The girls loved it, that they could be like big mothers to them and to him. So they did that. And he became spoiled. He recognized that. And he was spoiled with all of his growing years. But he loved them, they loved him, and so he always knew that there was a place that he could go with them. And they still do that today. Mark grew up, became the second uniting force of the family. The first uniting force, Beth, she stayed with us. Second uniting force, Mark. Well, let me tell you about our life after Mark was born. Now we had 12 kids. Well, that was interesting because when I first got married to Lois, I said, I want 12 kids. Dolores told me that she always wanted 12 kids. So now we had 12 kids. Well, we never expected it this way, but it occurred. So now we have 12 kids. What do you do with 12 kids? Well, one thing is, a couple months after Mark is born, we have to go on vacation, summer vacation. So we decided we would go to the Amish country. So we took 2 cars, we had 2 station wagons, and we filled it up with the kids and we went to the Amish country. Well, that turned out to be a nice vacation for the kids. Dolores didn't find it quite so enjoyable because one night I took the kids to the movies and she had the small kids with her as well as Mark and her mother, Grandma, and it stormed while I was away, an hour and a half away at a movie theater. Well, the movie was okay. Everybody enjoyed the movie. Came back home or came back to the tent because we had tents. They were called camper-tenters, and they were off the ground, thank God. And I get home, and Dolores said, tomorrow I'm leaving here, we're going to a hotel. My mother cannot be in this kind of a situation. And her mother said, oh, I had so much fun. It was raining, and it was so, I loved every moment of it. Well, that meant we didn't go to the hotel. But the next morning, about 4 o'clock in the morning, after we had all gone to bed and to sleep, somebody is knocking on the door of the camper tent, which was closed, and saying, can I come in? Can I come in? Well, it turns out that Tom Bridman, who had been sleeping at one end of the camper tent, fell out. And so at 4 o'clock in the morning, we opened it up. He came in. Well, that year's vacation went by. We decided that the Amish country was not for us. But during the year, Claire Schlick, Lois's sister Claire, told Susan and Kathy about Long Beach Island and actually took them there for a couple days. And Long Beach Island has a vacation place. So they said, we should go to Long Beach Island next year. And sure enough, we called Claire. Claire set it up. She got us in a house. We went there to the house. It was the Boy Scout house, which was good because we needed a big place with 12 kids. And Grandma, we took her along with us, and we went to LBI. LBI became our family vacation place for the next 15 to 18 years. And then in the 20th year, Kathy organized the group to go to LBI. Long Beach Island is not too far away. It's about 2.5, 3 hours away. And we would drive there. But we would meet there with Claire and her family. Of course, there's Claire and Ted and 3 children. And we'd meet there with, four children, and we'd meet there with John DeSanto, Lois's brother. Now, the DeSantos and the Schlicks, who were related to Lois, right, now took Dolores into that group as well. And Dolores took them into the group. It was a great uniting of families. Dolores and Pat DeSanto became very good friends. Both of them were tall, slender, beautiful women. We've got a picture of them at the beach, which I thought was absolutely excellent. Someone sent that to us about a year or so ago after Dolores died. Every year in the summer, we'd all meet at LBI. We'd go to dinner together. We'd play baseball games together, go on the beach together, do all sorts of things together as a group. And then Claire would bring some of her friends. And then Lois, not Lois, but Susan and Kathy would bring some of their friends. And then Arlene brought some of her friends. And all of a sudden we started to have a place where people could come, and just like our household became a place where people could come. The door was always open. There came a time that was appropriate for me to retire, and that was when Mark graduated high school. So in 1987, Mark graduated high school. I put in my papers, and in September, I was retired. Oh, retirement, oh God, that is something. You know, the one thing about retirement, you never have a day off. Well, starting from my first day of retirement, Dolores, my wife, went into the hospital. She had surgical procedures that had to take place. So we went through that, and I'm glad to say she came out well. Kathleen, my daughter, had to go for surgical procedures. She went through them. Thank God, everything came out well. And there I was now, at home, and a member of the Kiwanis Club, working with Kiwanis on a volunteer basis, the president of the Mineola Republican Club, and next year's chairman of the Kiwanis Club, and I'm enjoying that no end. And I also, during that period of time, become the chairman of the Knights of Columbus, the Grand Knight of the Knights of Columbus. So in a 5-year period, I had 3 presidencies or chairmanships, which turned out to be very, very nice, although difficult. And Dolores insisted that much as I was involved in them, my primary responsibility was to the family, and so I should make sure that I was always there. That's how I did. I was able to keep that going, I'm glad to say, and she enjoyed the benefits of being the Grand Knight's wife and the wife of the president of this and that. So I was involved in all that stuff. There came a Friday, the Friday of the 15th of September 2016, where Dolores was up, and I came down at about 8:30, which is what I usually did because Maria was here at 8, and she helped Dolores get up and do all her stuff. And Dolores said to me, I have to go to the hospital today. And I said, okay. I said, you sure? And she said, yes. She said, but I want 2 cups of coffee before I go. So I got her 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for her, then I got 2 more, one for me, one for her. And we sat, we talked, we had coffee, called the 911, they brought her to the hospital, and that night, Arlene, Donna, Mark, and I were all visiting with her in the hospital. Donna and I left to go to dinner. Mark left to go home. Arlene stayed with her. And at about 12 o'clock, Lori went to sleep, and Arlene went home. 3 o'clock in the morning, nurse walked in and found that Dolores had passed away. She called us. I told her to get a priest. The priest came in. By the time I got to the hospital, the priest was there. She got the last rites and left this world that way. During that whole period of time, she didn't moan, groan, or whatever. There were times when she felt bad, you could tell that, where breathing was very hard for her, but she'd ask me to rub her back or hold her hand or something like that. Those were the things that were very important to her. I played music for her whenever possible so that she would feel like she was still going on. We had a lovely life together. It is never to be forgotten. In the last year, since Dolores' death, or the last 2 years, since Dolores' death, I have undertaken to go back to doing what I was doing as a little kid, and that is going to daily mass. And I go there every day, and it's very, very nice. I've met a whole group of new friends there. I have a contingent of 5, 6 ladies who have adopted me, and I love that. Of course, they're beautiful ladies. One of them is 105 years young, and her partner is 90 years young. They're both nuns, and they live in an apartment in East Williston. And they come, and they always have a big smile on their face. But the 105-year-old one, you can tell that there is something behind those eyes, and it's not just a little fun. It is reality, and beautiful woman. Praying the rosary is a very powerful tool that the Blessed Mother listens to. And so, since I always believed in the Blessed Mother and Jesus and Joseph, I believed that it was a powerful tool. I listened to what he said, and he said very simply, he said, if you have a very serious thing that you want to have done, you want answered, you have a prayer you want completed, then if it's very serious, take a 54-day rosary commitment. And every day for 54 days, say the rosary. And I listened to that, and it struck me that that's very meaningful. And he said, and if you do, the Blessed Mother's going to step in and help you out with what you need. Struck me that I have a granddaughter who has MS. And in 54 days, there will be a chance for her to start a new program. So I'm praying the 54 days, and hopefully at the end of that, it will help her to resolve her issues. I recommended that we work on a booklet that would have all the stained glass windows with a story about each and a little bit of background. The booklet was given out to everyone who attended the 90th anniversary party and has been placed at the back of the church for gifts or to be given to people, and it's recommended that there be a contribution. They recommend $5 a book. It's okay with me. And so we watch the level of the books and make sure that they're always up to date and we have enough there. There were a number of things that I lived through in my lifetime that had major impact on the world. One of the first things that I remember was the kidnapping of the Lindbergh child, where I was 4 years old and my mother would read to me from the Daily News what was happening and how the Lindbergh child's kidnapping was resolved by the police. That was very important because my mother also described to me that there are people who would steal children for their own purposes, do whatever they had to do with them, sometimes kill them, sometimes just take them away. And that I, as a child, had to watch out for that. And so that remained with me throughout my early years. And when my brother was taken by a lady who had lost her own child and was trying to get away, it became part of my living experience. That was, the Lindbergh item was the first of major events. The second major event that impacted me was the Second World War. Although I lived through the Depression, I never knew the Depression. And that was because my mother and father knew how to put food on the table, clothes on my back, and how to get me to enjoy day-to-day living, no matter how difficult it might appear. So the Second World War became a big impactor because it allowed things to happen that normally would not have happened, and it caused things to happen that needed to be done. I became an air raid messenger with the Air Raid Warden Corps. I enjoyed that no end. I was 13 years old. I was supposed to be 16, but I told them a fib and I became an air raid messenger. And the reason I did that is because my friend Dick Potter, who was 16, tall guy too, but he and I always palled out together, and he became a messenger, so did I. And throughout the Second World War, we did that kind of service. We, in school, had a teacher for social studies who insisted that we remember that we living through historical times. And those historical times included the Second World War and the Hitler travesty and the Mussolini travesty, and taking an example from Churchill and the English, who were so devastated at one point in time. She infused to us a feeling of nationalism that was extremely good, but also consideration of all those in other areas that were being devastated. That was the second big one. The death of JFK, followed by the death of Martin Luther King and of Bobby Kennedy, were traumatizing. They were very, very strong. Each one of them had shown understandings of people far beyond the norm. And as public officials or people in the public eye, they took leadership roles that were tremendous and outstanding. Those leadership roles are the envy of all politicians. They could not follow that. Some have done well, but those three were just out of this world, and they were at a time that was very meaningful to me. The closing of the pulling down of the Berlin Wall, that was a very important item. The elimination of the USSR, that was a very big, important item. And the combination of Ronald Reagan, who began that whole process, and George Bush, who completed the process while in office, was a big thing for me. Because I could see that communism could not work. Communism was anti-people, anti-religion, and anti-freedom of speech, and it just could not work. And when the USSR went away, and most of the communist world went with it, that was a freedom item that I attached to and felt very good about. It affected my thinking quite well. The last and most difficult one, from a public standpoint, was the flying of the planes by bin Laden into the World Trade Center. At that time, I had been retired for a while, and Dolores and I were sitting in bed watching the Today Show when they announced we're cutting over to a problem that developed in the World Trade Center, that a plane crashed into it. Well, I had visions of the plane that had crashed into the Empire State, and I figured, this was a similar event. But I was watching it, and as it was taking place, the second plane flew into the second World Trade. I saw that. I saw it as it was coming. I saw it on television. And I proceeded to watch that throughout. Saw the people jumping out the windows. Saw the building falling apart and closing down. All those people dying. And that was a very big effect. I was not in favor of going to war with Iraq. I was convinced that we should go after the guy who had organized the flights into the World Trade Center, and who had organized the flight into Pennsylvania and the one into the Pentagon. I was convinced that we had to go after those people, but I was not convinced that Iraq was the place to go. None of the paperwork, none of the reports said, I have seen a problem there. And so when John Paul, I believe it was, John Paul II, said to George Bush, I don't think you should go in there. There's not enough to show. I agreed with him. Well, George Bush could have said no, but he allowed himself to be seduced by the CIA, and allowed himself to be seduced by the Congress, who had agreed 97% or so that we should go to war with Iraq. That was a travesty. That still stays with us. It was a travesty for many years. The war has never really stopped as a result of that. So we continue to lose men over there and women, and all because everybody was afraid, or all the people in Congress were afraid that things were going to get worse, when there was no reason to believe that. Those are the things that impacted me from a historical perspective. In 2012, as I remember it, I was designated, I and Dolores, as the Italian couple of the year for the Knights of Columbus. At that point in time, the Knights of Columbus contacted the mayor and the senator from this area and asked them to come in to make citations and recommendations. The mayor came in and he named the street on which I live as Sam and Dolores Donato Way. And for 2 years the sign was up, and as people went down and tried to come down this block, it was not Pomander Road, it was Sam and Donato Way. I have a copy of the sign, I'm proud to say, and I enjoyed that no end. That was a great feeling to have. The major thing in my life is to give good example to other people. It has always been my thought that no matter how much you preach, unless you do what you preach, or unless you do good works, people do not recognize that. I'm not too concerned about recognition, but rather about the example that will lead others to do good. So I look at my grandchildren, I look at my children, and I say, hey, I've got to do good works. I've got to show them that it's important to do good works. And it's got to be carried over into their lives. And so I've been able to do some of that up till now. I'd like to continue it on. I mean, the day I die, I want to be able to say that one of my children or another of my children has gotten on the right track and has been doing well. I would really love to have one of my children become a priest, another one become a nun. I would love to see that. If that happens in my lifetime, it would be an absolute blessing. My greatest satisfaction in life has been my children, my family. My children have been an absolute boon to me. And so I'd like to name every one of them. First, Susan, Catherine, Arlene, Richard, Stephen, Tom, Tommy, Kathleen, Donna, Matthew, Beth, and Mark. I have been blessed tremendously with them, and I know that, at least I hope that they know that I love them very much. Thank you, Lord, for everything you've given to me, especially 2 wonderful wives, 12 wonderful children. And as I say to some people, I had 2 wonderful wives, and each of them gave me 6 wonderful children. Talking to the unborn, or unborn at this point, in my family, who at some time in the future may be listening to this, and even to those who are there today who are listening to it, I want to say that the thing that is most important in my life, and has been the most important in my life, and I believe should be the most important in your life, is that you hold on, you become religious, and you hold on to your religion. You can only live this life while you're here. Religion carries you to the beyond. We talk about being born, and a child, when it's born, is crying, much like they're not very anxious to leave the womb because they're so comfortable there. And so they cry for that. Well, when we are alive in this world, we want to hold on to it too. But who knows? Going on to the next world will be better. But our lives are really very short. Now mine, looks like I'll be an octogenarian, at least for a while, and all of you will hopefully sometime get to that point. And I've had a few painful times, but the truth of the matter is that my God has carried me through that all. I believe in God, I believe in Jesus Christ, and I pray constantly, and I go to religious services constantly. As a little kid, I used to go to Mass daily, and then life caught up with me, and I lived my way through my whole life. And then when my wife Dolores passed away, I found that I now had the time to be able to devote to that again. So I go to Mass daily. I pray the Rosary. Those things carry me through, because there's a hierarchy in this world. I mean, whether you go to a business or government or any place, there's always a hierarchy. Well, in this world, the hierarchy is God, and the rest of us fit underneath that. So I believe in that, and because I believe in that, I can live my life pretty fully and freely. I don't have to be afraid of anything. And not being afraid of anything, I'm able to survive on a day-to-day basis when things get tough. That's the message I would like you all to get.
This is the Happy Song. It was originally developed in 1951, and it has covered 4 generations since then. And I'm glad to say the kids seem to love it even to today. In fact, some of the big kids still love it, and they dance to it. So, here's the Happy Song, special for kids. That's the Happy Song.